Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this afternoon's brainstorming, if I can use the word. Our MC, Master of Ceremony, or the lady in charge of the proceeding, has already introduced all our speakers on the stage today. I don't think I need to go over their respective position once again. Just to say two things. Yeah, they are all part of the RSIS Board of Authority or Board Management. They lord over us from time to time, once a year at least. But for the last so many years that I have the privilege to serve in RSIS, we have very pleasant guidance and occasionally tough suggestions from these well-established experts guiding the school. So we are very happy to receive their advice and suggestion going forward for the school. So thank you very much, members of the Board of Governors of RSIS. The second thing I want to say is that the topic today, Trump 2.0, US policy towards Southeast Asia and the world, I guess is going to be the most important topic for the next few weeks until the man actually took over the White House, and then he will create news there at the White House, and then it will be on a different level of exchange and discussion altogether. But for now, we have the expertise of these speakers on the stage to try to maybe second guess what Donald Trump will do. But I don't think this is just simply second guessing. Every one of the members on stage is an expert on a certain specific area. So we look forward to their opinion about how they see Donald Trump and US policy towards the rest of us in the world, particularly to the Asia-Pacific region. So we don't have much time because I'm told 90 minutes only. Therefore, I will stop here and then I will let the conversation be conducted by each of these individuals. The only thing is that we have about 7 or 8 minutes for each of you. Yeah. Do what you can in the 7 or 8 minutes. Those cannot be pushed into the 7 minutes. We can leave it for Q&A. Yeah. So all you need to do is to signal that, all right, I have done enough. Now I will leave the rest to the Q&A. Then I will remember to call you during Q&A session in response to the audience. Is that okay? Well, if all of you are ready, then we will proceed to the first speaker. But thank you for coming. Yeah. Now we will let all the experts give us their little commentaries and advice on how to see this new phenomena in the United States of America, or somebody say, on the stage of the world. Over to you, Michael.
Okay, thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My colleagues on the panel have specialized expertise on an array of international issues, and so I'm going to give some general remarks from my own perspective about how I think things are likely to unfold in Trump's second term, and I want to emphasize that I don't speak on behalf of RSIS, the Elliott School, or anyone else. Trump's supporters are excited, of course, by his return to the White House, excited and optimistic. Many non-supporters are hoping for the best. They essentially say, we survived his first term, we'll survive the second. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. I am deeply pessimistic for the US and the world. My expectation is that the worst case scenario is also the most likely scenario. And I think there are 3 reasons why Trump's second term will be even worse, significantly worse than his first term. Reason number 1, in Trump's first term, most of his senior foreign policy and national security advisors were conservative internationalists, and this really mattered. In the Department of State, in defense, his chiefs of staff, his national security advisors, almost all of them were internationalists. They believed in an active, engaged U.S. foreign policy. They believed in the importance of U.S. commitments to allies and friends around the world. They believed in the importance of steady U.S. leadership. They're also conservative. They believed in the importance of U.S. military alliances, U.S. commitments to those alliances, and leading alliances carefully. Trump is fundamentally an isolationist. He sees no inherent value in alliances or partnerships. The Trump administration's first term was strategically incoherent, in part because Trump himself was and is strategically incoherent, but also because Trump and his advisors had very different worldviews. They're conservative internationalists. He's an isolationist. His advisors in his first term helped to steer and contain Trump in what I would consider to be relatively positive ways. They weren't totally successful, of course, but they were influential. Trump's second term will be entirely different. Trump will be surrounded by Trumpian ideologues and weak, subservient flunkies, which brings me to Marco Rubio, who will probably be nominated to be Secretary of State. He's a conservative internationalist, but he will be all alone, and I think he will be a weak Secretary of State. In short, in Trump's second term, he will not have any adult supervision on foreign policy and national security. He will be unrestrained to be his true self. Which brings me to my second concern, Trump's worldview. First of all, he's intensely self-centered and self-absorbed. Trump only cares about Trump. He's impulsive, erratic, inconsistent, contradictory, unreliable. He does not have a grand strategy for U.S. foreign policy, but he's not entirely random. He has a few core beliefs, and I'll just touch on them quickly because of time constraints. Belief number one, an intense aversion to multilateralism. This has implications for U.S. policy toward the UN, NATO, the EU, and ASEAN, also for the Paris Climate Change Agreement and the World Health Organization. He prefers bilateral negotiations because he sees the U.S. having an advantage in discussing issues with smaller, weaker powers. The second core belief is coercion. It's his favored tool in human relations and in international relations, especially with allies and friends. And you can ask Denmark, Canada, and Panama about that. A third core belief is he is reflexive about retaliation. He said whenever he's hit, he hits back 10 times harder. That has implications for crisis management, something to keep in mind. The fourth core belief is that he is obsessed with economic tariffs, and I'll just say a couple of words about that. He says the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff. He has talked about putting a ring of tariffs around the country. He has called the Trans-Pacific Partnership a rape of our country. He's unlikely to change that view in 2025. He loves tariffs more than anyone on the planet, and he also simultaneously understands them less than anyone on the planet. He sees tariffs not just as a coercive threat, but as a policy action. He has said trade wars are good and easy to win. My expectation is that trade wars are coming back again in 2025. Fifth and final core belief, he's often described as having authoritarian impulses, but that understates the problem. He has spent most of his adult life as the dictatorial head of a totalitarian enterprise called the Trump Organization. It has no corporate board, no shareholders, there's no family member who could stand up or challenge him. It's the system he grew up in, he lived in, it's his default setting, it's his preferred model. For most of his adult life, except for his 4 years in the White House, he has been the dictatorial head of a totalitarian organization. Internationally, we know that he admires Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un. He extols them as strong leaders. It's not just admiration, it's emulation. And I worry that in his second term, he will take steps in that direction. He said he'll be a dictator, but only on day one. I don't find that reassuring. He said in 2024, vote for me and you won't have to vote again. He's talked about having a third term as president, even though the US Constitution prohibits that. So I worry that he could declare martial law in 2028, or possibly even in 2026 if it looks like he's going to lose ground in Congress. And you might say, well, that's inconceivable in an established democracy, and I would just point to the case of South Korea, where the inconceivable has happened. The third and final thing I want to talk about is difficult to talk about, but I think it's important, and that's Trump's personal decline. And I'm not a medical doctor, but I have eyes and ears. And if you compare Trump's performance in the 2016 campaign when he was 70 years old to his performance in the 2024 campaign when he was 78, he has clearly declined, and many people have observed this. He's even more confused about facts and reality. He's even more inarticulate. Some of his unscripted remarks are terrifyingly incoherent. He's clearly in decline, and this will continue. And he will be 82 years old in 2028. Now, I'm not saying that everyone in their 70s, 80s, and 90s declines. I just turned 70, and I'm hoping that all of us will continue to be super smart and super sharp in our 70s, 80s, and 90s. But many people do decline, and Trump is clearly declining. Joe Biden also declined over the last 4 years. He was 78 when he moved into the White House in 2021, clearly declined over the last 4 years, but he was also shielded by his staff. Biden conducted fewer press conferences than any president since Reagan 40 years ago. Trump will not be hidden away. He craves the spotlight. He loves television. His continuing decline will be on full display. One of the things to look for is the presidential schedule, which in his first term had many hours a day set aside for executive time. It'll be interesting to see if he spends even more time in executive time in his second term. All of this has implications for the US and the world. Trump, who's not known for self-control, will have even less self-control in the future. His instincts and impulses are even more likely to be proclaimed and acted on. I worry, as I said, that his totalitarian impulses might play out in the US. As far as the world is concerned, although he's an isolationist, he also is enchanted with the idea of using military force. In his first term, he talked about using nuclear weapons, and so I worry that that impulse will be even stronger in his second term. As far as US allies are concerned, they will have even less confidence in his reliability and US reliability, which could make nuclear proliferation more likely. And finally, as far as America's allies are concerned, will they try to take advantage of a weak, declining American president? Maybe they won't, but maybe they will. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, this is a good starting point, American speaking from Washington, D.C. Next, we will have Bakes Gill. Bakes, over to you.
Thank you very much. On that happy note, Michael, I'll try to instill a somewhat slightly less gloomy viewpoint and focus primarily on Asia, and in particular U.S.-China relations in the next Trump administration. So 3 points. First, and drawing in part from what Michael just said, precisely because of the uncertainty, the volatility, the predilection for bluster, and of course the well-documented appreciation Trump seems to have for simply telling lies, we cannot simply take at face value necessarily everything that he has had to say that he's going to do. I think there's another feature of his approach to policymaking and leadership, and that is to try and keep his counterparts guessing about what he's going to do, in the belief that through that tactic he can pull off a better deal. Now, I don't believe that that's necessarily a good strategy, but nevertheless, I think we can at least take some comfort in the recognition that he said in a lot of things. The question is, has he actually followed through on very many of them, or has he followed through very well? So that gives me some comfort to know that he's not going to do everything he said he's going to do. It's not going to happen. And secondly, a second point I want to make, and a reason why I believe the first point is something we at least need to take into consideration, has to do with emerging divisions that we have already identified within his leadership team that is going to be presumably reaching positions of power and influence within his administration, either as formal members of the cabinet or senior appointed executive branch, or even among his sort of unofficial external advisors. And I think the case of relations with China is a good example to look at where these divisions have emerged, and where I think we can expect there to be contrary opinions, infighting, some forms of blocking and tackling, which could stem some of the worst instincts that Trump might otherwise bring to the table. For example, consider the policy toward China. Now, it's quite well known that Trump has spoken frequently and often about the imposition of tariffs. There are plenty of folks, even within his own circles, that are not necessarily in agreement with his tariff policy, even including Elon Musk. So it raises a question in my mind just how far those tariffs will go. I was speaking with someone recently who made the distinction between made by China and made in China, whereas meaning that the tariffs may well be applied to those sorts of goods which can be very precisely identified as being made by Chinese firms, and whether they are coming into America through Mexico or through Vietnam or through Thailand or elsewhere, versus things that are made in China, i.e., for example, Apple products or Tesla-related products that are made in China but are not made by China. So there's going to be some nuance, I suspect, in the imposition of tariffs, if they happen at all. We'll have to just see how that works out. On Taiwan is another important distinction, and we're seeing emerging differences amongst the Trump team. Some, while sharing a general view of hawkishness or sharing the general position that more needs to be done to confront and challenge China, where it breaks down is how to do that, and in what areas and how forcefully. I think a good distinction, for example, is the view of some within the emerging leadership team to go all in with Taiwan, to basically abandon the 3 communiques, draw a line down the center of the Taiwan Strait, and take more formalized steps to integrate Taiwan into the U.S. defense system, even to resurrect the former U.S. Republic of China alliance. Now, that's an extreme position, but there are those who've been very vocal that this is what needs to be done. There are others who are much more cautious about that, who fully recognize that that would probably mean war with China. And I might differ a little bit with what Michael had to say earlier. I don't believe Donald Trump wants to have war with China. He's been on the record of saying he doesn't want to go to war with anybody. Again, whether that's going to be something we can expect, we don't know. But my sense is that his instinct probably is to avoid a great power war with a country like China. Beat up on Denmark and Panama, sure, but not China. So we'll have to see where that division unfolds, especially with regard to Taiwan policy and on tariff policy. Lastly, a third point, in spite of what may come off as slightly less pessimistic concerns about Trump's approach in Asia, basically on the basis of where I see obstacles and more difficulties confronting Trump's worst instincts than are generally recognized. That all said, it is still true, I believe, that many strands of what we've now seen emerging over the last several years in the MAGAverse, the America First policies, I think we have to recognize are not simply a Trumpian phenomenon. In other words, they're not going to be going away if and as Trump himself goes away at some point in the next 5 to 10 years as a living and vibrant political force in American politics. I think that means that allies and friends in this region need to be more prepared than ever that America is moving in a direction where it's going to be likely to be less active in the region, perhaps less committed to alliance relationships, and definitely more committed to an expectation that allies and friends do more to defend themselves and to join with America in trying to counterbalance China, but to do so by committing more and more of their own resources rather than those of the United States. I think it adds up, unfortunately, over the longer term to a more volatile and certainly less certain and very different international space here in the Indo-Pacific in the future than we've been accustomed to over the last 30, 40, or 50 years. So I'm hopeful that our friends at RSIS will have the answers we're going to need to help us navigate what's going to be a much more difficult and problematic security situation in the region in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bates. Okay, we now have Selena. As you all know, she's an economic expert. Yeah, I don't know what she's going to say, but after hearing two fierce overseas experts talking about Trump, let us hear what Selena had to say about whatever she want to tell us.
Thank you. So I think tariffs definitely is top of mind for everyone at this stage. Whether it's going to be 60% for China, 100% or more for certain other countries like Mexico or Canada, we have to wait and see. But what is is that Trump is actually very serious about tariffs. Okay, he needs it to partly pay for the tax cuts that he wants to enact. So we do have to take into account that some tariffs will have to happen. It's going to be more punitive than Trump 1.0. Okay, I found it quite interesting reading this book by Robert Lighthizer. As you all know, he was one of the trade negotiators during his first term. And the book that was published 2 years ago now, it's called No Trade is Free. No Trade is Free, yes. So he advocates fair trade. And fair trade from whose perspective? It is the US perspective, okay? So tariffs is very key to achieving this objective. So as economists, I have to give you some statistics. Who is most vulnerable to tariffs from day one when Trump takes office? If you look at who were the top 5 countries with the highest US, surpluses against the US running trade deficits against these countries, it was China, Mexico, Vietnam, Germany, Canada. Trump has made his view on China, Mexico, and Canada very obvious. Okay, he hasn't said that much about Vietnam or Germany, but we know that within ASEAN, Vietnam is probably a key target. Why do I say that? Okay, because we have seen in the last 3 to 5 years with the pandemic and with China +1 that was happening with the whole recalibration of the global supply chains, You just look at Vietnam's share of exports going to the US. It went up from 18% back in 2013 to basically almost 30% in 2024. So Vietnam will be seen as a proxy for Chinese manufacturing exporting to the US. Just to give you a sense of what kind of numbers we're looking at, they basically exported around 97 billion US dollars. That is 2 times what Singapore exported to the US. Okay. Compared to the rest of the region, apart from China, the export shares going to the US were relatively stable for most of the ASEAN countries. Malaysia went up from 5 to 13%, Indonesia stable around 10%, Singapore's share went up about 5 to 8%, but still one of the lowest in the region itself. And then of course with the targeting of China, we did see China's share of exports going to the US did drop, but only from 17 to 15% during this period. So much for decoupling and tariffs. Okay, it's hard to say that he has achieved complete decoupling. And then if you look in terms of the trade balance with the US, again, Vietnam runs a big surplus against the US. But even the US deficit with China, last year for the year to date in the first 11 months or so, you're looking at 270 billion, okay? So that is almost equivalent to the full year before that of around 276 billion or so. So actually, the perverse effect has happened. People were expecting Trump to hike tariffs, so what did they do? They front-loaded everything, right? China and all the ASEAN members and probably Mexico and Canada were exporting a lot more to the US in anticipation that tariffs will come on board, okay? So Trump will have the ammunition to say he needs to do tariffs, but I think what will likely happen is that A, you're going to get retaliation, or B, the supply chain will try and reconfigure to find ways to get around the tariffs, which was really what happened with China the first time around. Second point really is that how will China retaliate? I think there will be some key differences this time around. China is obviously not stupid. They have learned from Trump 1.0 tariffs. They already have started maneuvering, right? They have reduced export subsidies for some of the key manufacturing. They are also going after critical resources, the 2 Gs, gallium and germanium or something like that. I can't really pronounce it. But basically these are quite key to the manufacturing of high-end electronics, right? So China and probably the other major trading partners will hit back where it hurts the most for the US. So if US gets a surge in inflation, for instance, that's going to hamper the Fed's rate cut cycle. But when US consumers get hit with higher prices, they may also have a bit of pushback. So we'll see what happens at the midterm elections. Right? Then my third point really is that can we assume that ASEAN or Singapore, for that case, because we have a free trade agreement with the US, will escape unscathed? I'm not so sure, okay? Mainly because I think in a best case scenario, he only levies tariffs on China and maybe Canada and Mexico. But I think given the state of affairs, they know that China is also finding other ways to get around these tariffs. ASEAN and the rest of the world looks like they are going to be in the sights as well. So if you look at the case of what happened with Canada and Mexico, they had NAFTA that got rewritten. So there's no guarantee that even the US-Singapore FTA will save us. Of course, Singapore is in a little bit of a different state because we actually import a lot from the US and we run a trade deficit against the US. So maybe we will not be in the first initial batch of targets. Last thing I want to talk about really is in terms of market impact, right? We already see exporters maneuvering by front-loading a lot of the exports to the US, but even in financial markets, people are, after the Trump elections, people are positioning for stronger dollar. We have seen a lot of volatility in the US Treasury market of late with the steepening of the yield curve because they think that inflation is going to come back. and the Fed can't cut very much this year anyway. The question really is, can the world afford to move away from the dollar? Not really. I think the Tina phenomenon still applies. Really, there is no alternative. Any shift away from the dollar takes a very, very long time, years if not decades. And Trump has already said, anyone who tries to trade using anything other than dollar, watch out, more tariffs will come your way, right? So I think it's going to be a world where we will have to pay a lot of attention to US and to Trump, and probably we will expect that market volatility will persist. I just want to say one thing. I don't think China is without any leverage, okay? I know these days we don't really talk about it, but China still owns a heck lot of US treasuries, right? So that's something that we probably should keep in mind, apart from other things that they can do. So I'll probably stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, numbers always frightens me, but in contrast to the two preceding speakers, this time around, numbers seem to be giving me some comfort. Yeah, but anyway, as Selina said, this is just one side of the story. Yeah. Now let's hear Stuart. He is ready to go from the little island called the United Kingdom. Yes.
Well, that was cheeky, wasn't it? Hello, everyone, and I am speaking personally this afternoon. Because I am out of the chairman's reach, I'm going to do what every good student does, reinterpret the question. I am not going to talk about Mr. Trump. I'm going to talk about somebody else. Inspired by a conversation with Michael Brown last night, and when Michael said a little earlier that Trump will be unrestrained, I'm going to make the argument to you that there is one person who will restrain or constrain some of the aspects that we've heard described of Mr. Trump's policy, and perhaps lead to some of the nuances that Selina has talked about and that Bates has talked about as well. And that person is Mr. Elon Musk. Mr. Elon Musk has, of course, a government position coming up for him, but it's not a very important government position. It's relatively low down the pecking order. And when we look traditionally at the way in which government is established, you would not expect somebody to have a reforming portfolio of a new department to get rid of departments, to have a particular power base. But he does. And he does not only because he put an awful lot of money into Mr. Trump's campaign. He's also there as really the number one supporter of Mr. Trump because of the power of his voice, through X and through social media. And he has become, of course, not only a powerful advocate of Mr. Trump, but in the past month or so, he has become a foreign policy actor. And the question that I want to raise with you is whether you think that his foreign policy actions, his words, will align with the impulses of Mr. Trump, as we've had described, or will constrain and restrain them. Let's just think for a moment about some of the things that he's been saying in his international political interventions. He has selected Germany as a target. The Chancellor of Germany he has described as a fool. A fool is not really diplomatic language, but the President of Germany he described as an anti-democratic tyrant. Now, many of you will know the impact of this sort of language in the politics of Germany. Extremely traumatizing, particularly ahead of a general election in a few months' time. But even more shocking to the Germans than that is that Mr. Musk has come out in support of one particular political party. The party is the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, which has been seen by the German security services as a threat to national security, hails from the far right, has really radical propositions for Germany, such as leaving the European Union, and is probably the party that in those elections will make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to create a majority government for Germany. So here is somebody who is very closely aligned to Mr. Trump, having a direct impact upon the elections in an allied state. But I can tell you something very important here. Germany has got away with it very easily, because Mr. Musk has also picked on the government of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And he has picked on the government of Britain again and again and again. And in case you think these are just one or two messages, they're not. There are tens and dozens, sometimes that many in one day, of messages about how dreadful the British government is. He has called for the overthrow of the British government that was elected on a very large majority only in the summer of last year. He has said that the Prime Minister, Mr. Starmer, is leading to a police state in Britain. He has said that Mr. Starmer is racist against white people. He has said that Mr. Starmer supports child abuse. In Britain, there is a very junior minister who is responsible for safeguarding. And the abuse that he has poured on this woman's head is so unpleasant, I would not say it in a public forum like this or any other. So he's being very, very interventionist. He's being very, very challenging. And the question comes is, will there be an alignment between this foreign policy activity of Mr. Musk and that of Mr. Trump? Will Mr. Trump be able to rein in Mr. Musk? Or will Mr. Musk become still more active in this space? So firstly, we can see some areas in which there is an alignment between the two. On Canada, both of them clearly feel that Mr. Trudeau is not a very yes, okay. I will say this, Mr. Musk described him as a tool, and I don't think he meant a screwdriver. I think he meant it in a rather different sense. And as we know, Mr. Trump describes him as the governor and so on and so forth. Well, Canada has a particular relationship to work through with the United States at the moment, but there seems to be an alignment between the two. In Europe, is there an alignment between the two? This is a really important question, of course, because there is a war going on in Europe at the moment. And will the work of Mr. Musk to undermine governments in places like Germany and Britain be the policy of Mr. Trump? Or will it be the case that Mr. Trump will look at what is happening in Europe, which is that a lot of European governments are aligning together against what is being said, the French, the Norwegians, as well as the Germans and the British? Will that be unhelpful to what Mr. Trump is trying to do? There is a really important test case in this, and it's the test case of Italy. The leader of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, herself comes from a far-right political background. She is positioned as being the spokesperson for Europe with regard to the United States and Mr. Trump's administration. She has a very strong professional relationship with Mr. Musk. It is apparently the case that Starlink might now be the chosen investment for Italy, rather than the European Union's own programme of work. And when the other Europeans were saying Mr. Musk had gone too far, Giorgia Meloni came out and said, he is not a monster, he is a genius, and we should support him. Is that kind of wedge driving something Mr. Trump wants to control himself, or is he going to be comfortable with Mr. Musk driving that? Over China, as we've heard, Mr. Musk has very strong interests in China. Very, very strong relations with the Chinese leadership. Half the Teslas in the world are made in China. He has strong business interests that may lead to some of the nuances that we just heard Selina and Bates talking about. Or it may not. How will Mr. Musk's business interests in China play through an anti-China Trump government? We've seen Mr. Musk already come into some conflict with those who deem themselves strong supporters of Make America Great Again. Because, of course, Make America Great Again is also about making Americans feel economically safe and strong again. And on immigration, Mr. Musk has said that the United States needs skilled immigration. Of course he does. If you've got a technological company you're running, what do you need? You need the best brains in the world to stay ahead of your competitors. But those, Steve Bannon was the most graphic in his descriptions of his views of Mr. Musk, who speak for MAGA, say that this is wrong. This is not supporting Americans. How will those tensions work through, and how will those nuances that we were speculating about on the panel earlier play through in that sort of space? So we have in Mr. Musk, I think, somebody very interesting. He's become politically very noticeable, important and powerful. He has started to pursue a foreign policy. He has very clear interests in a number of these different domains, in immigration for skilled technological specialists, in production and sales of automobiles in China, of Starlink in places like Italy, and indeed in Ukraine, who depend upon Starlink for much of their activity in the war with Russia. How will those tensions play through? I think that one of the things that we do not understand, and I certainly don't know, is how these dynamics will work through. And I will leave this last thought, a quote, a very famous quote from a British Prime Minister called Harold Macmillan. This is a very long time ago now. But when he was asked, Prime Minister Macmillan, what is the most difficult part of being Prime Minister? He said, events, dear boy, events. And while we calculate about the power of relationships between the key figures, while we work through the strategies in the United States, one of the things that I think we need to also bear in mind is that events, things that happen, unplanned, unforeseen, may have dramatic implications for how all of this works through. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. Now we go to Peter. Yeah, I hope you will say something different. Yeah. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you. Well, being the fifth speaker, I'm in that position where everything that needs to be said has been said, but I haven't said it, so here goes. I want to focus on what I consider is really the threshold question about Trump's second term, and that is whether it signals the end of US grand strategy. And it matters because for the last 8 decades, grand strategy has been at least at the rhetorical centre of US strategic policy. And over that time, the contours may have changed with different administrations, but every one of them, in their own way, has sought to articulate US interests with broad strokes which blend values and interests. So will Trump follow in the same tradition? Now, Trump makes a virtue of being unpredictable. Usually the resort of the weak, he's deploying unpredictability to convey strength. Keeping your enemies guessing, it's now said, has a deterrent effect. And these days, in geopolitics at least, genuflecting at the altar of deterrence is the ultimate expression of faith in peace through strength. Now, the trouble with an unpredictable superpower is that the unpredictable can easily become the unreliable, because power that's detached from coherence is less a demonstration of strength than a recipe for chaos at the worst or haphazard strategy at the best. So far from strengthening US power, it is more likely to dissipate it. By making a virtue of unpredictability, Trump is also signalling that the US, in my view, has no grand strategy. Because to have a grand strategy, you need to have clear objectives, clear values, and clear priorities. It just cannot long survive if its animating feature is to enshrine the unpredictable. So the question is, will Trump abandon decades of grand strategy built around the retention of US strategic primacy? Now, I don't think Trump is likely to see it in this way. He understands deals and the leverage needed to pull them off. And while those around him in his first term drafted a national security strategy, which was all about retaining US strategic primacy, I doubt that Trump took much interest in the strategy that was presented in his name, because he ultimately understands power and likes to exercise it, but it is very much an instinctive view of power rather than understanding the theoretical underpinnings of US strategic power. Now, in many ways, you could ask the question, is this absence of interest in grand strategy likely to be, in an unlikely sense, an asset for Trump? Could his focus on leverage lead him to conclude that global primacy is the ultimate generator and guarantor of leverage? Because if you are the preeminent power, you have more leverage than any other single power. But the trouble with that approach is that it raises the question of primacy for what purpose? I mean, historically, the US has portrayed primacy as a means to a larger end, in an expression of exceptionalism, the promotion of democracy, the advancement of values, the city on the hill, as the Americans like to think of it. And Trump has never shown much interest in any of these higher purposes. He's dismissive of the multilateral machinery that the US itself created. He is someone who doesn't think about interests and values. He focuses exclusively on interests. And that's going to be a very different type of American leadership. Now, in many ways, I think, Trump's return to the White House underlines the fact that this is not an aberration. Trump 1.0 might have been seen as an aberration. It emphasizes, in my view, that the US remains true to its historical roots, a country born in revolution and with a remarkable capacity to reinvent itself, whether you like the way the reinvention is going or not. And that reinvention under Trump will be most dramatic in domestic policy, but it is also likely to shift the US, in my view, from an obsession with strategic primacy to a more narrowly focused policy on advancing American interests narrowly defined where it matters most. And some may say that this has always been the way in which the United States has exercised power, but I think we will find in Trump 2.0 a very different story about how that is exercised. So what does this all mean for Southeast Asia and this part of the world? Well, look, I think the short, honest answer is who knows? Because we have no larger strategy against which we can judge Trump's approach. Winning is not a strategy if you don't know what the game you're playing is. And in many aspects, that's what we're dealing with in the Trump presidency. Let me just finish up by making a couple of broad observations. American foreign policy has always been anchored in America first. Every country's foreign policy is anchored in putting the interests of your country first. So that is not a particularly Trumpian concept. But the characteristic of the United States in the post-war period is that it came to the view that its best interests, America's best interests, were served by the construction of a liberal international order with all of the attributes that we have come to know. Trump has no interest in that liberal international order, and he has an economic rather than a strategic view of US interests. And the one point I would emphasize is that Trump is going to be about economic ascendancy. He is not going to be about strategic primacy, and that is going to be a huge wrench in the way in which America has perceived its strategic interests. For him, leverage is a means to an end, but it's not clear at all what Trump's end actually is, or whether he himself knows what the end is beyond the notion of winning every single battle without thinking about the overall war. So I think we're seeing a United States which is likely to replace exceptionalism with a what's in it for me worldview. In other words, the United States behaving more normally as a country. And if you're looking for a silver lining in all of this, perhaps it is that a policy of economic ascendancy and not strategic primacy, a policy which doesn't continue the notion of American exceptionalism in the way that we've known it, which is not to say that Trump doesn't see the US as an exceptional power, that in the long run may actually prove to be a better fit for a multipolar world than US strategic primacy being the North Star of US policy. So I'll end there.
Thank you, dear colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, we appreciate you being here, listening to our experts' commentaries and assessment. Now the time is for you to give your comments, ask your questions. But since there are so many of you, please be short and sharp. Maybe one question, the most 1.5 questions from each one of you, and then we can at least go one round from left, center, and right, and we see where we go. Yeah. But I also want to alert our speakers on the stage that you have heard each other, so you have a different opinion or you have another perspective. Bear that in mind. Maybe towards the end, in the wrap-up, you can give us your responses to how you see what your colleagues on the stage have talked about. Yeah, it will be good for us because we are, after all, a school. RSIS is a graduate school, so we always like to see how our own experts see what or heard what have been said, can offer an opinion to enlighten the rest of us. So now the floor is open. Please just give us your name and ask quick, short questions. Yeah. Okay, Barry Resker. Yeah, let's go. And then after that, the lady behind. Microphone to Barry, please.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up from Peter Varghese comments and make the observation that if you look at the East Asian response to the second Trump administration so far, it is one where it seems to be rather relaxed and not with the kind of tensions which we noticed the first time he came around. And I would argue that that is because the Trump administration adopts a policy of interests rather than values. And this is an approach favored in East Asia as well. Transactional relationships seem to be one that is an approach adopted by many Asian states. The question that I have to the panel is, do you have the same reading of East Asia as I do?
Thank you. Quick response from any one of you.
I think you're fundamentally correct, Barry, in drawing that distinction, and it may also explain why there will be elements of Trump's policy which will cause a measure of discomfort for those countries who have bracketed interests and values at the centre of their policy framework. I think that, together with the question of whether unpredictability can merge into unreliability, is going to create challenges for US allies in the region in a way that they may not for those in East Asia who are not formally allied to the United States.
Any other reaction from the rest of you? If not, yeah, Selena.
Maybe I'll just chip in to say that, I heard this analogy, when two elephants fight, everyone smaller in the grass gets trampled on. So I'm not very sure ASEAN will escape unscathed. Okay, the fact that Trump in his 2.0 tariffs is saying 10 to 20% on the rest of the world means that he recognizes that China is using proxies to get around the tariffs. So coming back, to Bates' point about made by China and made in China, I think he's going after the made by China anywhere in the world as well, right? So it's going to be a little bit of an extended reach rather than just straightforward, what China makes in China, for instance.
Bates, you want to say something?
Just a quick comment, Barry.
Yeah.
It could be that simply going through the process of engaging with the next Trump administration, it seems a little more familiar, simply because we've been through it once. That could also be a partial explanation for the perceived less concern. I think too that, and just take the China example, because that's the one I'm most familiar with. They've been preparing for this for 2 or 3 years. They may be less concerned, not because they look forward to a transactional and tariff-based policy, interest-based policy from Washington, but rather they've done their homework and they've figured out how to absorb the worst of it as best they can. And I suspect that's happening in a lot of parts of Asia. It's not because they relish a transactional, interest-based American policy, but rather they're just better prepared for it.
Thank you, Bates. We have a lady there. Yes, please, before we go back to the front, come.
June Park, I'm a South Korean political economist and currently a senior research fellow at MEI in US. MEI is Middle East Institute. For 2 questions for Ms. Ling and Dr. Gill. So my question is on the AI executive order that Biden placed to prevent risks from AI. Trump has said in his campaign that he would repeal this executive order. I wonder how the magnitude of this would impact the Singaporean economy, because Singapore now has OpenAI branch office in Singapore, and Singapore is poised to work more towards algorithms with OpenAI. I wonder how you see this going forward. And for Dr. Gill, one of the components of that executive order was on CBRN threats from AI, and CBRN is chemical, biological, radioactive, and nuclear. And it has some components of barriers toward automatic nuclear missile launches. And I wonder what you see coming in US-China relations with regard to this function enabled by automated machines, how you see within the context of foreign policy the Chinese will react if it is repealed.
Any one of you? Serena? Or Biggs, you want to go first?
I'm not an AI expert, but let me give you a rather simplistic answer. I think he could repeal it, but I think the world is going to move on with AI investments, and it will just continue to develop with or without Trump.
Just a little bit of context. I mean, you're referring, I think, to the sort of takeaway or deliverable that came out of the meeting between President Biden and CCP General Secretary Xi when they met in South America. These sorts of stated agreements between nation states, I think you need to take with a very, very large grain of salt. They're unenforceable. We'll never know, or it'd be extremely difficult to know what AI capabilities are being deployed by these two governments to help them reach decisions about targeting, about responding to threats, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we can take some solace in the hope that the leaderships of these two countries accept that decisions of that type of magnitude, especially in an escalatory environment going towards the possibility of nuclear use, there surely should be a human in the room, and maybe more than one, to be helping assess what AI might be assessing. Michael's going to be in a much better position to respond to this. Maybe the best I could say for all of this is that in a strategic environment in which the United States and China are already in a steeply declining cycle, we should be happy that the two leaders can agree with one another. It was not easy, by the way. Even that very simple language that those two men agreed to was a tortured negotiation between the two sides. But the fact that they could at least make a statement publicly that expresses concern about the role of AI in formulating choices of life and death, literally, is something that needs to be taken very, very carefully and cautiously. But that's as best as, and as far as I think we can go in understanding what that statement meant.
Thank you, EDC. I'm Alex Arifianto from Indonesia program RSIS. One question for Michael. Speaking of worst case scenario in terms of security, do you see the likelihood that the US under Trump going to be involved in a major conflict, and particularly with conflict with regions or countries that we're not expecting, like 2 weeks before, like given his rhetoric about invading Canada or Greenland, do you see a likelihood that he'll be involved, he'll be sending troops to these countries? And if he does so, how does it will change the geopolitical outlook for the rest of us? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I think one of the inconsistencies in Trump's worldview is that he is, as I said, I think fundamentally isolationist, but he also has this enchantment with the use of military force. I think if Trump does use military force, he's going to be very careful about it. I don't think he's likely to go to war with China, and I think the whole question of Taiwan then becomes extremely complicated and hard to predict, because on the one hand, he does talk about taking a hard line against China on economic issues, trade issues in particular, which is his particular focus. But at the same time, he professes, and I think genuinely has, great admiration for Xi Jinping. And so I think that would mitigate against any kind of escalation against China. The case I worry about is Iran and its nuclear program. And Iran has been moving closer and closer to nuclear breakout. It's probably just weeks or maybe even days away from having weapons-grade fissile material, enough for a bomb. And US presidents, Democratic and Republican, have said that they would not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. And so I'm almost hoping that Joe Biden does something about it in the next 10 days or so before he leaves office, because I think he would be calibrated in using military force against Iran, and Trump might not be. And so I'm still hoping that there's a way to keep Iran from crossing the threshold and possibly leading the US and Israel into using military force. But that's one case where, as I said, Democratic and Republican presidents have said, we will not allow this, we will use military force if necessary. And so I would put Iran at the top of the list in terms of possible candidates for US military action.
Question? Where is the microphone?
Thank you. Athar Abbasi, I am from Pakistan High Commission. My question is,
Where are you from?
I am from Pakistan High Commission. I'm
Yeah.
a diplomat. My question is how Trump's policies are going to impact China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI.
BRI.
Yeah.
Okay. Bakes?
Not aware of President Trump or any of his senior advisors making any declaratory statement of policy of any importance, specifically in relation to BRI. So I'm a little unclear whether Trump would do anything about it. I mean, what I find most interesting about BRI, at least in the last several years, is the degree to which the Chinese have taken choices to reshape it, to move it somewhat out from being the centerpiece of Xi Jinping's global engagement, and rethinking it to a degree to make it more less controversial in the states where it's deployed or where BRI projects are underway, and also to reshape them in ways that are more attuned to the local needs, in ways that I think maybe were dismissed or not thought through as carefully in the earlier stages of the initiative. It's also, I think, interestingly become more, just as the early stages of BRI were actually were in many respects an effort to export excess capacity out of China into the developing world. So too now an effort in, say, the green BRI, the digital BRI, the health Silk Road, all of these other sort of non-capital intensive aspects of development, which are also much in need in the global South, have now been branded as BRI, which I think is probably smart, and is reflective of China's own aspirations for changing its domestic economy from one that's capital intensive to one that's more sort of higher up the value chain. So all that is a long way of saying that I think BRI is probably not going to be a target I don't see it being a target of the Trump administration particularly. So I think we should, but so too China has made it less of a centerpiece of its global strategy.
Thank you. Yes, over there.
All right, hi, thank you so much. I'm Marcus, I'm a final year undergraduate student and a writer for my university's International Affairs Society. So my question is for the panel, as pertinently highlighted by many of the panelists, the incoming Trump presidency seems to usher in a more transactional and economically protectionist foreign policy towards Asia. With
Hold on, slowly, slow down.
Sorry. Okay.
Just go straight to your question.
Okay, so with this in mind, how do you foresee this shaping ASEAN's economic and political engagement with the other regional superpower of China? Specifically, how do you think ASEAN countries might pivot towards China to balance US pressure? Or do you feel that due to potential internal economic challenges within Beijing that Beijing's currently struggling with, could ASEAN countries instead try to placate the incoming administration, US administration by would it be a more beneficial approach for the ASEAN countries? Thank you.
So your basic question is how ASEAN country will react to what Trump is doing, yes?
Or rather, how would the Trump presidency being so economically nationalist and protectionist and transactional, how will it affect ASEAN countries' engagement with the other superpower, China?
Okay. You got it, Biggs? Michael? Serena, you want to give a shot?
Well, I think if you look for ASEAN, both US and China are very important trading and investment partners. It's very hard to say you can choose one over the other. So I think most of the ASEAN countries, including Singapore, have said we are neutral and we are open for business, right? I must caution that I'm a little bit disappointed in ASEAN's response, because just looking purely at the trade numbers, if you have a world which is increasingly polarized and your two major superpowers are a little bit at odds with each other, you would expect that there will be greater focus placed on growing intra-ASEAN trade, for instance, right? But if you look at the share of intra-ASEAN trade, in 2020, it was 25%. In 2022, it was 22%. It's gone nowhere, right? So we are still today very, very dependent on trade with the US and trade with China. So the question is, do we see any impetus under Trump 2.0 for ASEAN to make greater headway in terms of economic cooperation, whether it's within ASEAN itself or with other major trading regions like the EU or Japan, outside of dependency on US and China? So that's something I still ponder about. Thank you.
Stuart?
I just wanted to really build on that point more generically. Bates made the point that Chinese leadership has been preparing for a Trump administration for 2 to 3 years. And I think that goes for many countries around the world. Trump's victory is actually not a surprise, and many have been preparing for it. And in addition, unless Michael Brown is correct, 4 years is a very short period of time. So if any country is planning major changes like pivoting, I would be very surprised, because exactly as Selina says, it takes a very long time to produce strategic change of that nature. 4 years is a relatively short period of time. It's probably a US administration which, as Peter and others have been saying, because there's no strategic framework, is likely to be more chaotic than coherent. And so there are plenty of opportunities diplomatically to play that slightly longer game.
Thank you. Peter, you want to give any comments?
The only thing I'd add is that I think you shouldn't underestimate on economic policy continuity after Trump. I mean, we saw the Biden administration pick up a lot of the economic measures that Trump put in place. And this goes to my point that we can no longer think of Trump as an aberration. Trump is representing something more profound than an aberration. And while he can't serve a third term, we shouldn't underestimate the continuity of policy between the second Trump term and whatever comes next, whether it's Republican or Democrat.
One of the findings we come across with regard to what Selina mentioned about intra-ASEAN trade always just hovering around 20%. It's really because most of the exports of ASEAN member countries come from factories producing for the world, yeah? And from my own experience in ASEAN, there is really not much of thinking producing goods or any other things that Southeast Asian would want to buy. Much of our intra-ASEAN trade has to do with food. A bit of motor cars, yeah, now we have some, in Singapore you can see some motor vehicle from Thailand or Indonesia. But beyond that, the focus is really on producing food and producing manufactured goods for the world market. Yeah. So the long-term thinker in ASEAN community, when they think about the future of our ASEAN intra-trade, they want to find some particular projects or products that, say, Indonesia can produce for the rest of ASEAN, or Thailand or Vietnam can produce for the rest of ASEAN. And apparently the policy thinker feel that it will take some time for those ideas to be implemented. In the meantime, so much things are happening out there. It's easier to just go onto the bandwagon, let the Make by China people come to produce goods in Southeast Asian country and export out to wherever the owner of this kind of industry want to send the goods to. So this is something that ASEAN leaders have to really work on. But the other problem is that ASEAN leadership in the past 3 years and the next few years will be constantly changing. Yeah. Instead of having a big economy like Indonesia thinking about producing goods for Southeast Asian country, they want to produce goods for export to big economy in the world rather than trying to penetrate Southeast Asian market. So I don't think we can go very far, Selina, beyond the 22 to 25%. This is going to go on for a while, but I think if we start to think about our digitalization business, technology business, maybe we can do something to push out the numbers. Yeah. Okay, I think, yeah, first of all, there's somebody here. Let me listen to what is his question. We are not having a lot of time, so let's be quick about it. Ask your question and then we get an answer from the speakers.
Yes, sorry, my name is Kwong Yi. I'm a law student from SVSS. First of all, I apologize for my cough. Secondly, my question is this. Zooming out beyond Trump, what do you think are some of the effects, some of like Trump effects on domestic policy for the next 2 or 3 or next few cycles of the US elections? Thanks.
Okay. Domestic policy of Trump. Okay, wait. Let me take another question. Anybody? Okay. G.B. Kyung, our distinguished fellow from RSIS.
One of the strange phenomena is this non-executive advisor, whether Jacob Herbert, your David Sack, or your Elon Musk. They are very strange development how do you see being accommodated in the US system, or you see them fizzled out once the cabinet is formed and the adult like Rubio, like Heiser, your Scott Benson will become the core. Do you see this non-executive advisor, especially from the big tech? That's why I don't think AI is going to be gone away. These are all the big tech fellas. So that's my number one question. How can you accommodate this non-executive advisor within the US system, or is likely to just fizzle out in the months to come? So our 2 American friends can enlighten us. Second is that, if my understanding of US system, all the tariff require congressional approval. So really you can't see the effect until maybe 2025, 26. Is there a way for the president to execute his tariff policy as soon as possible? The only ways I can remember is you declare it's a national security or national defense issue. Is there a way to bypass the system and implement this tariff? Otherwise, you will have a case where the capital market will react faster than the actual tariff policy. Thanks.
Okay. Got it. Maybe I can take one more question from this lady. You put out your hand earlier. Yes.
Anne-Marie Schleich, RSIS fellow. The Biden administration focused very much on enlarging or strengthening unilateral alliances in the Asia-Pacific. Bates, you were saying that predicting that the Trump administration would be less committed to alliances and allies. What's your prediction concerning Quad alliance, AUKUS alliance? Thank you.
Okay, panel, any one of you would take any question? Michael?
I'll say a couple of things about U.S. domestic policy, but just very briefly since we're focused on foreign policy. I expect Trump and the Republican Congress to institute a new round of tax cuts, mainly for corporations and wealthy people. I expect the administration to slash a lot of social programs that support working class and middle class people. And I expect Trump personally to engage in sustained attacks against U.S. media and anyone who criticizes him, and I think that's consistent with my concerns about him taking steps toward authoritarianism. I'll just say one final point on Trump and what's new about him, and I was really struck by Peter's comments in particular about how the U.S. has had a grand strategy for a long time, and although there have been variations across administrations, there's also been remarkable consistency for a very long time. And there's a real departure there with the Trump administration and with part of the American people. But I think there's a real divide in the U.S. between the traditional internationalists, mainly Democratic and some Republicans still, and the MAGA part of the Republican Party. And so I think it depends a great deal, assuming we continue to have elections in the United States, whether the next president is a MAGA Republican or an internationalist. Probably that would have to be a Democrat. And so we could continue to see, I think, not a shift toward MAGA isolationism, but a continued flip and flop between those two positions as long as they both have around 50% of support from the American public.
Stuart?
Very quickly, two very quick points, building on what Michael's just said. I think the key thing that decides elections is cost of living. So what will be the impact upon the sorts of changes that Michael's talking about? Also, in a tariff world, it's not going to be painless for American citizens. There's going to be just a very significant impact. So cost of living, there are many other factors, but simply for now will be a big impact on what happens in the next election and beyond. And the other point very quickly is I think the age of the influencer is here to stay. I mean, how it interacts with the structure of government remains to be seen, but influencers are now such an important part of the political system, I think, in the United States, that whether Musk stays or goes as an influencer, there will be others.
Okay, I was going to say that on the domestic policy, he's talked a lot about immigration and repatriation, but actually looking at the figures during his first term, I think his bark was worse than his bite because more people got repatriated in Biden's administration than under Trump. So of course you can argue that Trump 2.0 is going to be different this time, but I would agree about the point about cost of living. I think he can do punitive tariffs, at least for a start, but it will have to be negotiated down to be something that is beneficial for the US. I mean, just give you an example, 40% of like Hasbro and all the toy makers are made in China, right? Come Christmas next year, if the prices shoot up by 60%, you can imagine there's going to be a backlash in the malls for the American consumers. I do agree that non-executive advisors are probably here to stay. If you look at Trump's pattern, it's who has his ear, who is seen as a loyalist, not so much of what position they hold. Yep.
Peter?
In response to two questions on the Quad and AUKUS, I don't see Trump walking away from the Quad. If anything, I think he might look at how the Quad could exercise greater leverage over China, rather than, dismantling the Quad. And on AUKUS, I think by and large he would see it as a reasonable deal for the US. given the investment that's being put into US submarine building capability under the AUKUS arrangement. So I don't see that as... I think the challenges for AUKUS are of a different order to whether or not President Trump continues to support it. And Wee Keong, I share Selena's view. The US does have a cabinet system of government, but it is a very weak cabinet system of government because authority is exercised largely by the president and through the president's policy. So I don't think the system will have difficulty absorbing the concept of a non-executive position.
Thank you.
Quick comments. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's not at all unusual to have, senior advisors who are not appointed, who are not approved by the Senate. That's been common probably since the first president. What I find interesting about this dynamic, though, is in the age of the influencer, and given just how powerful and influential this particular gentleman can be, I think the dynamic is going to be, and this may run afoul of some of the predictions which Stuart made, it's going to be the clash of personalities. It's not going to be someone in the Senate standing up and saying, down with Elon Musk. It's going to be Donald Trump himself, who may well find him to be getting to be too powerful, too influential, too vocal, stealing too much of the spotlight from him. And I think it would be a quick a quick end to Elon Musk's relationship with Donald Trump, and that's entirely possible that could happen too.
Okay, I see a few more quick question to be asked. So let's do it quickly. The lady at the back there, that's quick one. We'll do a quick one, and then here one guy. Any more there on this side? No more, huh? So timekeeper, we have another 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'm Olivia from CNA. My question is relating to the Global South. What do you foresee the Trump administration's policy towards the Global South will be, given as we've also seen China step up its outreach to these countries? And in turn, how do you think China may or may not recalibrate its strategy to these countries? Thank you.
Okay, about Global South, yeah, here. Where's the microphone?
Hello, I'm James Song from an AI think tank. Instead of talking about Trump or guessing, I wonder maybe we can call for action, where at the end of this conference we can write a letter to him, where I'd like to have each of you proposing an idea that you write to Trump, which is markup, also good for the world. I'd like to do that, then maybe that will be very helpful to the constructive actions. Thank you.
Okay, next. Somebody there? No more? All right, panelists, your response to the two set of questions, one from Global South and one from Call to Action. At the rate things are going in America, by the time your letter reaches there, the guy is out of office already. Your recommendation. Okay, Michael. Okay, I think what we do is that as we respond to the questions, you can also give your closing commentaries. Yeah, you can disagree with the panelists or whatever you want to say that have not been, whatever you wish to say that have not been said, you can use that. Michael.
On the Global South will not be on Trump's top 10 list of concerns. He will see the Global South, I think, almost purely in economic terms. And it will indeed, I think, provide an opportunity for China to play a more energetic and prominent role because it will not be a priority for Trump or his administration. And just also on climate change, I think there'll be an opportunity for China to step up and play more of a leading global role if it wants to do that, because the Trump administration is going to be deleting the phrase climate change from US administration websites. So not a huge priority there. And I think, I took 4 pages of notes here, so I hope all of you found this panel to be as informative as I have.
Bates.
But China's already, for the last 5 to 10 years, been devoting enormous resources, diplomatic, financial, economic, et cetera, into cultivating its relationships in the global south, and I think has been by and large relatively successful in doing so. China likes to claim that it is a developing country itself, and that therefore it understands the needs and aspirations of the developing world. And of course, it's not all benign altruistic interest. It's also seeing in its relationships in the global south a way to juxtapose its policies versus what China would characterize as hegemonic and colonial and exploitative policies of the global West. So China has every interest to further intensify and deepen its footprint and influence within the global south, and I think we should continue seeing it do so. I very much agree with Michael. I mean, it's not just a Trump. It's not only low down on Trump's sort of list of priorities for engaging the world. I would say, by and large, the United States has failed pretty badly in the last couple of decades in being more effective in engaging in the global south. One last point, of course, is another reason why the global south is not going to be seen as a sort of particularly positive element of American policy by Trump is the immigration question, right? I suspect that he sees the global south as actually a source of bad people trying to get into the United States, and so that's also going to color the administration's approach to this very, very important and increasingly vibrant and I think very underserved part of the international community.
Well, I'll just say that the evolution of the BRI 1.0 to the current model shows that China is softening its tone, is growing its soft influence and soft power. So ironically, I think the fact that the US is stepping away from strategic primacy actually gives space for other players to come up. But I think China has also, to a certain extent, learned that whatever it wants to do should do it quietly and softly rather than shouting it on the world stage, because that attracts a lot of unnecessary attention.
Two quick things. One, transactional actually means nuance. If you're going to have a transactional relationship, you're going to have a negotiation, you're going to have the kind of nuance that I think many people, including Selina, were talking about on the panel earlier. And that is Barry's first question, actually. That's about focusing on the interests and not the values. So that is the sort of thing that I think many governments have been preparing for the last several years. The second thing is on Bates's last point. Of course, there is always the combustibility of relations between people, and Mr. Trump and Mr. Musk can be quite combustible, as we know. To fall out with Mr. Musk would be politically very costly in the short to medium term. But actually, if we think about the way in which all the tech companies have moved towards Trump, look what Zuckerberg's done, look what Meta's done, moved very closely towards the Trump administration, they're all going to be looking from a business point of view towards the middle and end of the administration about where they jump next. And that is a very, to Bates' point, that is a very, very combustible relationship throughout the term of the administration.
Just two quick things. On the Global South, I think Trump will be completely indifferent to the Global South. I mean, Stalin asked how many battalions the Pope has. I think Trump would look at the Global South and say, what can you do for me, or how can you threaten me? So he's not into courting collective groups. He's into dealing, I think, in a much more bilateral prism. I think the bigger issue for East Asia and for all of us is that we have moved from a period of economic growth which was largely premised on win-win assumptions about a liberalizing international trading and investment system which can grow both parties, if you like, or all parties can lift all boats. Trump operates very much on a winners and losers way of looking at relationships, whether they're economic relationships or other types of relationships. And while I think the retreat from the liberalizing international economic order has been going for some time now, and it's not a product simply of Donald Trump. I mean, we've seen the Biden administration preside over the death of the WTO with as much enthusiasm as we saw under the Trump administration. This has very large consequences for the rest of us, particularly those of us who have built our economic prosperity off the back of an engaged, outward-looking trading system. So East Asia needs to be careful not to be too complacent about what's happening here.
Okay, I think we should wrap up. But since I am the so-called guy directing whatever is happening here on the stage and with you, I will make 3 points about what we have discussed or talked about today. Yeah, and these are not my original point. I pick it up as I travel around the region on ASEAN meetings, on ASEAN business, and people recognize me on the aeroplane and they make comments to me and they sometimes just throw darts at me. Number one, yeah, American exceptionalism is no more. Yeah. So I say, okay, so this guy who told me that, I say, so what going forward? No, it's all deals, making deals. So when you, Mr. Ong, you talk about rules-based order, don't give me this crap. Now it's called deals-based order. DBO, no RBO. My expert here, where's Joel? Yeah, he has to start thinking about how to change his rules to a deal-making thing. Number two, yeah, this one come from my friend in Thailand. They always call us for our money politics. Now America, with Elon Musk and everybody else who are billionaire, is also money politics. So it is not American exceptionalism, but American being absorbed by the practice of the global south. Number three, what happened about all this is that everything is ad hoc. So our predictability and our planning and our discussion at think tank level about this and that might also be affected, Michael. Your idea that, it's no longer based on all these things that we know, but it's what you call how the man handle himself and what is the best way of getting the leverage that he thought he has. So it goes back to very ad hoc stuff, right? Therefore, in our think tank work, how are we going to continue? We always look at precedent, we always look at certain things, rules, and what happened in the past, and this meeting, that meeting. But now, we got nothing to base on, man, except to listen to Elon Musk or, what's the guy from Amazon? Bezos. Very soon, maybe some local Thai tycoon or Singapore tycoon. I don't think we're original Singapore tycoon, but yeah. So this is what we're going to get, very much of the ad hoc stuff. So this is a new America, and all of us have to adjust to it. But the people in the developing country, they are very happy. America is no longer so exceptional, so idealistic, and so demanding. Okay, let us thank our panel and my board members from RSIS for this courageous way of explaining our phenomena from America. Thank you all for coming, and hopefully, we will be a bit more wise from this conversation that we have here. Have a good day. Goodbye.